Most people know that moving house is one of the most stressful things you can do. Well, surely moving out to renovate has got to be up there. But it's not only the house that is in demolition mode here today. I've got to show you the garden. Come on. Today, I'm clearing the decks to make way for the builder. But most importantly, I'm putting a bit of work in to protect some of my most precious treasures and making sure that the soil will be ready and full of life when the dust has settled and it's time for replanting. And while I keep pulling the garden apart, let's look at my plans for putting it back together. The back of the house will be windows to look out over the new garden. I'll build a pergola and cover it with vines. Of course, there'll be food and flowers and more trees. And a glass house, a deck, a wood oven, a chook tunnel, and eventually a studio for tinkering. But that all feels like a long way away, and I've got a lot of work to get done. One of the first things you need to do when you're starting out on a big project like this is really work out what you want to keep, and in this case, what you want to protect. A lot of my perimeter plantings have been quite temporary, but this persimmon tree is a bit different. I want it to be the centerpiece of the garden, so I planted it really early on in the piece. They're quite slow growing. And in order to stop the tradies causing it any damage, I've got to give it some protection. To estimate the size of the root system, there's some basic mathematics and all the details are on the website. And of course, for a large precious tree, you should always consult an arborist. The tree is still relatively young, so the root system won't be really extensive. I reckon this pallet will offer enough protection, about 1 metre round. Of course, I want the tree to be essentially in the middle of the pallet, so the first step I've got to take is to cut it. To make sure the tree is safe and secure, I'm just going to screw the pallet back together. I reckon this is going to send a fairly clear message to anyone working on site to look after my tree. But of course, there are some plants that the only way to protect them is to get them out of the way altogether. I know this looks a bit brutal, but I promise that this plant can take it. It's my hop vine. It's done a fantastic job shading this area over the first couple of summers of the garden. It's kind of a temporary solution because it happens so quickly. And these roots, they're ropey and going all over the place, but it will dig up really well. And I'm going to protect it by essentially propagating it. I can divide it up, take some cuttings, give it to some friends, and then I'll have a plant to replant into this garden or even somewhere else. It's always worth recutting the most damaged roots when you're transplanting something, just to make sure those wounds heal. Of course, it's a really good time of year to move this because this plant is dormant, it's completely asleep. So you've got a much bigger success rate. But I reckon if you've got to get started on a project, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, it's worth trying to salvage some plants. The worst case scenario, they don't survive, well, you haven't lost anything. Stick it in a large pot with some good quality potting mix. And of course, give it a drink. There are a few plants that I'm not retaining, including these ornamental pears. They've done a really good job providing shelter from the northern sun, but truthfully, I want to replace them with something else. And you can see they're not in particularly good nick, which means there's no point in transplanting them. This one's got 2 trunks. It's already started to split down the centre, so it's time for the saw. Of course, these long straight sticks are not going to go to waste. I reckon down the track I'll have some fun making some fantastic climbing frames. This one last pair gets to see another day because I want it to provide shade through those initial summers. It's going to take time for the rest of the garden to develop, so for now it stays. My backyard is stripped right back, ready for the back of the house to be renovated and creating a blank canvas to start building my new garden. I'm what they call a multitasker, and there's no way I'm going to work away on that house without working away on the garden. And in this case, I need to do a bit of weed control. And I've got a couch lawn here, which has been great, but I want it gone. I want to replace it with a whole lot of alternatives in the new garden. So there are a few ways you can do this without using chemicals. One is probably dig it out. But one of the most effective I've found is using the power of the sun and a bit of old builder's plastic. Squiddy, you might have to hop off. You want to hop off? Come on. Good girl. The plastic sheet blocks the light to stop the leaves from photosynthesising. And through the warmer months, it'll actually cook the stems. If you've got some corrugated iron, that'll work too, or a couple of old tarps. Overlap the seams and make sure you weigh it down really well. You don't want it to blow away and smother your neighbour's lawn. In the warmer months, this is particularly effective. It can kill off weeds in as little as 3 months. For couch, I'd say leave it a little bit longer. But once those weeds have died off, you can pull back that tarp, have a really close look to see if any have gotten away and monitor it really closely. But it is very effective. The one thing that is a downside to this method, when you're starving the couch and the weeds of all the things they need, it means that you're actually starving the soil of those things, oxygen and moisture, and that is the key to life. So as well as cooking the weeds, I'm also making plans to rebuild that soil life, and it's up here. As I've been clearing out the garden, I've been piling everything here. And, you know, I had lots of plants to cut back and pull out. Also been collecting the street tree leaves and even using the chook straw. And it's all breaking down really beautifully with just a light turn and a little bit of rain. I reckon it'll be fantastic to use on the garden. And instead of using a big base system, which I could have built, I've just used some straw bales, which themselves will break down into fantastic compost. But I'm going to put them to work first. I'm going to plant them up with some greens for my lunch and some for the girls. I've got silver beet, celery, kale and some cinerarias for colour. Straw bales make really good garden beds. If you don't have a garden to use, you can plonk a few down and plant straight into them. And I put them down about a month ago, so they've had a month of rain and weather on them. And I've also primed them with fertiliser. When I put them in, I sprinkled a bit of fertiliser on top to wash in. So now they're really, really soaked through and they are ready for planting. So all you need to do is make a bit of a hole, then grab a little bit of compost. You're essentially just making little pockets in the straw bale for the plants to go into. Really good for growing things like strawberries or flowers. Quick and easy way to get growing. Like everything else, give them a really good drink. And every couple of weeks, a liquid feed wouldn't go astray. I reckon I should start to pick leaves within a couple of weeks, and it should be enough to keep my lunches fueled right through the renovation. And I am feeling a little bit raw right now, I've got to admit, stripping the garden back and starting again. But I think the preparation is really worth it. Put so much time and effort into thinking about what I might do with the house. By putting that preparation into the garden, you get so much value. For so many of us, the garden is actually the biggest room in the house, and I cannot wait to rebuild it.